I'm going to try and put this on YouTube. I don't know if that's going to work, but anyway. So here's the quadratic formula. So you have three ways that you can solve an equation. You either use the quadratic formula, or you factorize, or you complete the square. Now, I'm being asked if you can just factorize instead, or if you can use just the formula. If they say to you, complete the square, and you use the quadratic formula, you're getting no marks. You have to be able to manage all three methods. They are going to be specific, and they are going to tell you which one to use. Okay, so they will say to you, using the quadratic formula, or maybe they'll give you a choice and you can use any one of the three, but basically, very often, you're going to have to use the formula. So this is the quadratic formula. You can see that one says minus b. So if b was minus 3, it would be minus 3, and you'd have 3. This one says b squared. So if b was minus 3, that would be 9, right? Not negative 9. And then this is minus 4 times a times c. You've got the square root of these things, just these things by themselves. And you're going to add and subtract it and divide by 2a. So you're going to have to remember this thing off by heart. It actually is completing a square. So if you go back and if you look over here, this is completing a square with a quadratic equation in the form ax squared plus bx plus c. And that's what you're always going to use for the formula. You're always going to use a quadratic equation in this formula. So if you have, for example, 2x squared plus 4x equals to negative 6. Before you use the formula, you're going to go 2x squared plus 4x plus 6 equals 0. And then you're going to go a is equal to 2, b is equal to 4, and c is equal to 6. Please note if I change the orders of the terms, so if I said 2x squared plus 6 plus 4x, then a would still be 2, c would still be 6, and b would be 4, right? The coefficient of x is b. So if you look here, it says what comes in front of the x is b. What comes in front of the x squared is a, and c is by itself. Okay. So if we complete the square, okay, with an unknown algebraic expression like this one, then I'm going to obviously take a out, and I'm taking it out of this term, that's easy. Taking it out of that term, that's relatively easy as well, right? So if I have a times by b over a, then that's back to being b, okay? So then I'm going to take this one and halve it as usual. So that's b over 2a, and then square it as usual, and then subtract it immediately again, okay? So exactly what you've been doing for completing a square. Then I know that this piece over here, all three of them, is this piece here. This piece over here, I'm going to be very careful. I'm going to square the b, and I'm going to square the 2, and I'm going to square the a. So I end up with b squared over 4a squared. Then in your next step, this a is being multiplied by both this bracket here and that one over there. So there it is, a is being multiplied by that one, and a is being multiplied by 4a squared, so there'll be 1a left over here when you finish cancelling, plus c. So we are now here. Then you're going to bring these two across, so change both their signs. Then I'm going to put them over the lowest common denominator. So if I've got c over 1 and b squared over 4a, and I make them over 4a, then I'm obviously going to have to times the c by the 4a. If I multiply the bottom by 4a, I must multiply the top by 4a. So I've got 4ac at the top. Then on this side over here, I want to get rid of the a, so I divide both sides by a, right? So now it's 4a squared, because I divided this side by a, and I divided this side by a, right? Same thing. So it's 4a squared. Then I'm going to square root this whole thing over here, because if I square root this and I square root this, then I'm going to just have x plus b over 2a, which is what I want. So that is plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 4a squared. I can then square root the bottom bit because it's a perfect square, so I have. And I can bring this across, that's going to be minus b over 2a, so I have. and then they're all the same denominator, they're all over 2a, so it's the same thing as saying plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac minus b over 2a, and that is the same thing as that. So in actual fact, the quadratic formula is completing a square. And the only difference is now we can use it without actually completing a square. So much, much easier. So for example, if you take this question over here, where we know what the answer is, if we factorize, we'd have x plus 5, and we'd have x plus 1, and we're going to get x, which is going to be minus 5 or minus 1. So we know what the answers for that are. So to use the formula for this one would be silly, but the point is it works, so I'd like you to understand it. The formula says that whatever comes in front of x squared is a, so a is 1. Whatever comes in front of x is b, so b is 6, and whatever comes in, whatever the constant term is c. Then you have to learn this off by heart. X is equal to minus b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. Okay? Now, very easy for you to get these things wrong if you don't substitute properly, but I'll explain that later. But let's just put this in there. So there's b is minus 6 plus or minus square root of b squared. Really, you want to use brackets. I'll show you why in a minute. And then 4 times 1, and then c is 5, right? And at the bottom, I've got 2 times a, which happens to be 1. So now I've got minus 6 plus or minus. It's quite a good idea at this stage to maybe work out this piece over here in your calculator. Otherwise, you can work it out in your head and so on, but just make sure you're very careful. So I've got 6 squared, which is 36, minus 20, and so that's going to be 16. Now, this is not surprising because we're expecting to be able to square root it because we know that our answers are sensible, ordinary answers. So there's x. X is telling you the answers. It's giving you the roots for your equation, which are minus 5 and minus 1. We know that. And the one is minus 6 minus 4 divided by 2. And the other one is minus 6 plus 4 divided by 2. So we're going to just do 2 separate questions over here. And so I've got minus 10 divided by 2, which is minus 5. And over here, I've got negative 2 divided by 2, which is minus 1. So it produces the answers that you're expecting it to produce. This is question 6 from worksheet 17. Now, you were told to complete the square, and if you go and use the formula, you're going to get 0, right? But let's pretend they said to you, you could use the formula or they didn't specify a method. Now the formula is going to be much easier. We know from the memo that this is the answer, so this is what we're expecting to get. Here, a is equal to 3, b is equal to 5, and c is equal to 1. And then you do exactly the same thing. Please write down the formula. You need to write this down every single time you use it because you have to know it off by heart. You don't get a formula sheet. And if you write it down with every single question, after a while, you will know it. I don't need to because I do know it. So b is 5, so minus 5 plus or minus square root of b squared, 5 squared. I'd use brackets if I were you. Minus 4 times a times c, close brackets, divided by 2 times a, right? And a in this case is 3. So I've got x is equal to minus 5 plus or minus. Now you definitely could use a calculator here. You've got 25 minus 12, which is not too surprisingly 13 if you compare with the answer, over the 6. They're not going to like you to give it in this form. You can see it gave you the same form as completing the square. They're not going to like that. Please then divide it into 2 different things and go 5 plus square root of 13 over 6 and do separately x is equal to 5 minus square root 13 over 6. Put them in your calculator and actually work them out. So please don't leave them like that. They're really not going to like it unless they say leave insert form, which I have never ever seen in an IG paper. So I'm just busy doing that on the calculator. They are going to want you to round off to 3 significant figures, which is going to be, for this one, negative 0.232. And now I'm going to go up to the original equation, change it there, and this one is going to be negative 1.43.